there's bound to be more of us.
Not enough. It's not enough.
Dog one, that's gotta be that cut on the right, or is it the one on the left?
No. Deerville is to the west of us. This is Dock 1.
They're killing us! And we don't have a fucking
E-Day, 1933. In a daring attempt to take the capital of Victoria and swiftly end the war, the United Emu Nation launched a massive and costly offensive, which would go down in history as the bloodiest battle in all of Emu history.
The carnage was horrifying. In some places, the bodies of my comrades were stacked 3 high. There was a red mist hovering over the landing zone, and the paint of death covered my feathers.
Some 8,000 emus would be killed or lost in action on E-Day, and it would be the greatest single loss the United Emu Nation would suffer throughout the war. Soldiers returning from World War I to Australia began to start farms and settlements in Western Australia, but the emu population was notorious for eating crops and destroying land. To combat this, the Australian military authorized an attack on an unarmed civilian emu population. On November 2nd, 1932, 2 Australian machine gunners opened fire upon a small flock of about 50 emus. The emus were quick to scatter, and their range from the gunners made the shots difficult to hit.
I didn't know what I was getting into. I was just a clueless chick then. Me and my mates all signed up by lying about our age. We thought it was going to be like the games we played as children. We never saw what was going to hit us. One second was a peaceful patrol with my mates and emu companion. The next, chaos. Bullets were whizzing past my beak as everyone was in a panic, trying to get away from them. The humans.
A second attempt led to the death of 12 emus, which would spark the most catastrophic war in emu history.
We escaped the first volley of bullets and thought it was over. We were wrong. Slim metal death thundered all around me, killing my friends one by one. Some days I wonder why they had to die while I got to survive. I don't know why I'm still alive. Some say I'm lucky to be alive. I'm sure as hell not feeling it.
Word of the attack was quick to disperse among the emu tribes, and they were furious. For the following weeks, small bands of emus from various tribes would wage a guerrilla war on the Australian government, but to no avail. The emus soon realized that they could not win the war against the Australian humans unless they united under one emu flag.
We set aside our differences, united by our thirst for revenge. Our wonderful and diverse culture emigrated to form one strong nation to effectively combat the human menace.
Though the tribes had successfully merged into one society, their troubles were not over. They were still outgunned and lacked the proper resources to wage a successful war on the Australian humans. The newly formed Grand Emu Council would ask foreign nations for financial and humanitarian aid in their war. Though many governments viewed the United Emu Nation as illegitimate and refused to deal with bird kind, 2 nations would answer the emu's call: New Zealand and the United States of America. New Zealand promised financial and military aid in exchange for the equal division of land following the conclusion of the war. Though the U.S. had a strong ally in the Australian humans, they foresaw their downfall to the emus, and chose to secretly send weapons and military advisors to various emu encampments in Western Australia. With their new allies, the United Emu Nation was able to fortify their positions in Western Australia and expand throughout Australia, capturing cities, factories, oil wells, and other useful infrastructure. Though the UEN now had multiple resources at their feathertips, they still relied on foreign supply ships, most of which came from New Zealand and cut through the Bass Strait to quickly reach UEN-controlled waters. After months of unsuccessful attempts to convince New Zealand to cease providing aid to the UEN, the Australian government created a naval blockade, preventing all non-Australian ships from passing through. Both factions knew that cutting off this critical transport line for too long would devastate the United Emu Nation.
The blockade had to go, and quick. The troops were beginning to run low on supplies, and we could no longer wage an offensive war on the mainland. Soldiers were told to establish defences and conserve ammo, for the next shipment may not come for a while.
The United Emu Nation was suffering, but they had a secret weapon that they had been keeping for such an emergency, the UEN Air Corps. The Australian Navy had not been expecting aerial attacks, and thus were totally unprepared for the slaughter that came their way. To launch their warplanes, the Emus created McEmerson FOB, the easternmost airbase the United Emu Nation had at the time. 15 bomber aircraft fitted with torpedoes and machine guns headed towards the contested region, escorted by 75 light fighters. The Emu's aerial domination proved effective in destroying the first fleet of ships in the blockade, though further attacks took the pilots to their limits. After several flights between mainland Australia and the Bay Strait, the UEN brass realized it could not go on for much longer unless ground forces moved in on Tasmania. But to move to Tasmania would be a distance too great to risk mass deployments, for the troops might be vulnerable in transport ships. A decision was made to capture King Island and establish defenses along its coastline. It was to be used as a staging ground for the attack on Tasmania and the later attack on Melbourne. Successful attack on the Bay Strait and King Island opened many strategic doors for the UEN, who were now in control of the majority of Australia. The UEN, by now, was a force to be reckoned with. They had captured several major cities and oil fields, their wealth grew with each passing hour, and with the continued shipments of weapons and aid from New Zealand and the US, they only grew stronger. On the other hand, the Australian military authority was growing weaker, and many high-value politicians had fled the country. The Aussies needed a win, and they would get it when the UEN attacked Melbourne in the infamous attack known as E-Day, a scale UEN operation in which the goal was to kill or capture critical Australian leadership in Melbourne, along with destroying several military objectives along the way. The American steady stream of supplies from the secret factories in New Zealand prioritized the attack, and thus a massive fleet of warships, landing craft, and warplanes were sent to King Island in preparation for E-Day, which was to occur on August 3, 1933. But on July 25, 1933, Australian intelligence intercepted a transmission between a secret war factory in New Zealand and a UEN-controlled city on Tasmania. After further investigation, the Aussies were convinced that an attack on Melbourne was coming in the near future. With this information, the Aussie military set up defenses along the coast of Melbourne and the surrounding area, lying in wait for the impending attack. The UEN powered towards Melbourne, expecting heavy enemy counterattacks, but were surprised to encounter no resistance near the entrance to Port Phillip Bay in the nearby coastline. They sailed into the bay unaware of the trap they had just sprung. In an instant, the skies were littered with shells flying towards the UEN battlecruisers. Guns all along the bay opened fire upon the landing craft as desperate Emu soldiers poured over the sides, trying to escape the storm of bullets. The entrance to Port Phillip Bay was sealed by Australian warships, trapping the Emus in on all sides. All attempts to reinforce the UN were futile. The Australian Navy was fortified too well. The beaches of Melbourne were clogged with young emu bodies, and the ships that had brought them there sank behind them. In total, 8,046 UEN combat personnel would die that day. The remaining 2,032 would be captured and sent to brutal extermination camps.
I find it hard to sleep at night. Some nights, I don't sleep at all. Not because of the screaming shells tearing the sky apart. Not because of the thundering of the machine guns or the mechanical rumble of the engines. But because of the dead. I can't live myself knowing I authorise a mission so costly. I feel as though the blood is on my wings. I'll make the Australians pay. Civilian or not. Soon they will rue the day they spilled the blood of bird kind.
Following E-Day, the United Emu Nation's morale was grim. It was only worsened by the news of emu prisoners being tortured and the bodies of their comrades being dragged through the streets. Their victories came at a high price. Their populations thinned with each sector taken. United Emu Nation brass knew that they would soon lose all that they had fought so hard to win if they kept wasting soldiers, so they had hatched a plan. The emu's superior brainpower meant that their scientific advances occurred at a greater rate than the humans. The United States of America meant to use this to their advantage as the threat of global warfare loomed. The Americans shared information regarding their nuclear weapons program with the United Emu Nations scientists, hoping for a last development of their dream weapon. This spark lit the political fire that was the global nuclear annihilation crisis. The Emu Society no longer wanted to fight. They did not want to deal with the politics of their allies nor the scrutiny of their critics. They began to desire a world rid of all humans, a world suited to their tastes. On November 12, 1933, the United Emu Nations broke all communication with the outside world and aimed their entire arsenal of 1,000 intercontinental ballistic missiles at the most populous human constructs on Earth. The public knows little of the events following the global nuclear annihilation crisis, but thanks to a few credible sources who requested to remain anonymous, we know a small tidbit of this historic event and how it still affects the emus to this day. The outer space community recognized the emus as a highly intelligent and space-capable species, and thus were contacted by the members of the Milky Way Treaty Organization, also known as MUTU. The emus were asked to lay down their arms against the humans and join the MUTU in their struggles against the Andromeda Alliance, or AA. After much deliberation, the United Emu Nations agreed to join if their conditions were met. They required a planet of their own and 30 billion space bucks to jumpstart their economy, and only when they would agree to use their supreme intelligence to develop weapons of mass destruction for the MUTU's use, the MUTU agreed to the terms. Though the intergalactic war still rages to this day, the emus have made a great contribution to the MUTU struggles, and benefit from being one of the largest economic powers in the galaxy. The Australian humans' crimes against the emu kind have since been forgiven, and some emus choose to reside on their planet of origin to this day, living the way their ancestors did lifetimes ago.